So my next guest was introduced to me by a new friend of mine, Meredith Bell, who's going to be on the podcast. Meredith said that this gentleman named David Wood is someone I have to meet, I have to have on the podcast, and someone that I should get to know. So I clicked on my friend Chris Doris's interview with him on his podcast. And what I found was, for me, a bit of a revelation. It was almost like meeting my better self, as if I meditated twice as much and read twice as many books. David Wood is a kindred spirit, but he's also the former consulting actuary for Fortune 100 companies such as Sony Music and Procter & Gamble and Exxon. So he has that pedigree in the glass buildings that we know and love when he moves into the world of helping people. Along the way, he's coached thousands of hours in dozens of countries around the globe. And he wrote a book called Get Paid for Who You Are, which I think is really relevant in the time of COVID. Today, David helps high-performing business owners to double their business by focusing on less. Does that sound familiar to people who know only tens in my work? David is the founder and CEO of Focus.co and Play for Real. David, thank you for being here.
Mark, it's a pleasure.
I was going, I do as much research as I possibly can before I have a guest come on the show, so that I am smart enough to talk about what they care about. And as I was going over the list of topics that you bring to your clients and you bring to the world and what you seem to care about, it just tracked so much with the things that I care about. Doing, Only Tens, the book that I wrote, is about only doing the 1, 2, or 3 things in a day that are absolutely essential, important, or you really have juice for. So when you talked about paring down and slowing down and doing all that stuff, it made me giddy while I was driving. Curious. Actually, before we go into any of this, the thing that I really wanted to talk to you about, because I have notes, and I was telling you before we start, and I was a little nervous talking to you because I'm so excited by all the topics. So they're all jumbled up in my A.D.D brain, and they came out with, at the mic, trying to pick one first to talk about. No matter how much I meditate, no matter how much I breathe, it's that way. But for now, I'm really curious. We're in the time where COVID is starting to end. People are getting vaccinated. Things are slowly opening up. Companies are grappling with whether or not they should stay virtual, whether they should have hybrid, what they should do. I'm curious, with the people that you're working with, what's the challenge right now in people's world? What are people coming to you with that is just their biggest wall?
My brain went to 2 different levels. The first level was the obvious things, like more revenue. They want to double revenue, because I work with a lot of business owners, and they want to leverage so that they have more time off, spend with the kids, go swimming with dolphins, write a book, whatever. So that's one of the levels my brain went to. But the other level, the brain generates problems. Is what it does. It's a problem generating machine, pretty much. And so I never know what problem a client's going to bring to me on a given day. Someone I just spoke to earlier today, his issue was planning. He's not really sure what to focus on. So that's what we went to. Someone else, we talked about, there are some conflicts with a business partner. Business partner thinks got to be much more detailed and do a whole bunch of stuff that my client thinks are completely irrelevant and useless. So there's some different value systems and whatever, and that's causing conflict. And it's a pain in his butt. So the broader answer is, the brain generates problems like, oh, I don't like this. It shouldn't be this way. And it can come in so many different forms. Like one client, her problem was she just got diagnosed with cancer. By the end of the session, that didn't really seem to be a problem anymore. So I guess in one way, I help people take away their problems and reframe them into something else. And then how that manifests in the world is usually more revenue, more time off, and having a much better time. So I've never answered the question. That I hope it made some kind of sense.
You did answer my question, because one of the things that I'm noticing with the clientele that I work with, COVID didn't really impact them financially or in their businesses. There seems to be two economies, and a lot of the people that I work with actually thrived financially. So a lot of their challenges were the same, except maybe leading people remotely and some of the things that we all know to deal with. So it's interesting that what you're talking about is also what's happening, whether it's COVID or not. Also, in an interview that I saw you talking about, that there really are no problems ever. There's nothing wrong ever. Can you expound on that? Because I was giddy when you were talking about that.
Yeah. Well, the way I still sometimes do, because I'm a workhorse, but I used to think that my happiness would be generated by the outside world. So I just noticed the interconnection here is a little unstable. Are you still able to hear me?
I am, but it was a little muffled. And if you could start over, that would be great. But
Yeah,
it was good enough, but I can edit this out.
so I'm going to switch. Yeah, I'll switch to another connection, see if I can use hotspot. And the irony is, I think the guy has just installed the Wi-Fi in the house, but I haven't gone and like put in the password yet. So personal hotspot. I'll try hotspotting. And I love the question. It's such a good one. All right. We are hotspotted right now. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. We're
Yep,
good?
you sound good.
Yep.
Looks a
Great.
little choppy. So I'll ask the question again. I'll ask the question again.
Yep.
So I'll put that up for my editor. Okay. So I noticed in one of your interviews, you basically said nothing is wrong ever. And I was giddy by the time I was done with that video. Can you explain that to people? Because it's very confrontational.
Yeah. So look, when I was younger, I used to be really interested in why people who had so much money and so much fame would kill themselves. And yet I met a guy in a wheelchair who had burns to 80% of his body, and he became mayor of a town and saved a mountain. And I'm like, how is it that this guy is loving life and other people are ending their life? And Byron Katie says the worst thing that can happen to you is a thought. And I now believe that to be true. It's not my circumstances. It's not the money. It's not the partner or lack of a partner. It's not the conversations I'm even having. It's not the house or the lack of a house. It's not the how tall I am or how good looking I am or how young I am or how thin I am. Those things can help, just like more money can help and more time off that can help. But none of those things control my happiness. The only thing that controls my happiness is what I'm believing about it. So if I lose a leg and I think my life is over, you're going to be talking to a very miserable David who's going to drag everyone down with him. But if I lose a leg and I do my inner work or talk to my coach and, process it, whatever, and I'm like, I still got one left. I still got another leg. I lost my sister when I was 7 years old, and I've told myself some very sad stories about that for most of my life, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when I can reframe that and not be such a victim anymore and say, all right, what have I learned from that? How have I grown from that? How have I become a bigger person? How can I replace or at least find another sister sibling type relationship in my life and do all that? There's no longer any suffering from it. It's like, okay, we move on. So I now believe that there's nothing wrong. And all you got to do, if you're listening to this and going, well, of course there's things that are wrong. No, just imagine yourself if we were to float out of this planet to a billion light years away and just observe the universe from that point of view. How could anything be wrong? There is no wrong. It doesn't even exist. There just is everything. The mind is the only thing that can create wrong. And that's really good news, because once you know that, and you know the mind created the wrong, then you also know the way out. The mind can also create right. It can create other stories like, Mark, you're so good looking and you're so successful and you got so much abundance in terms of oxygen and sunshine and water and friendship. But everything's a story, everything's made up. So the good news is if you're suffering, let's go and hack into those stories a bit and see if we can create a better story.
You're not, because it's really clear you're not saying that hard things don't happen. People lose children. People, lose businesses. Things happen to people that smack you in the face. And there's grief, there's emotions, there's feelings, there's things to do with that. What I hear you saying, and it tracks with me, is once I deal with all those things, the thought that it was wrong that happened gets me stuck. I can't move forward if I'm in that shouldn't have happened. Again, go back to Byron Katie, when you argue with reality, you only lose 100% of the time. So once I get, that happened, it did happen, it's not wrong or right, it just is. Now, what do I do with it? That's so much more freeing.
Yes, and we could ramp it up a little bit. So you don't have to wait
Please.
until you've processed all your feelings and suffered for 6 months of grief. You don't have to wait. I say you want to hack into your thoughts if your current experience is not one you want to have. So let's suppose Katie uses an example of when her mother died. She said she was wailing. Katie was wailing and sobbing because that's what the body wanted to do. But she said she could have filed her nails for all that had taken over her. Hadn't taken over her. She's still very conscious and present. I still cry about I'm 52. I lost my sister when I was 7. I still cry sometimes and I think about her. And now instead of having it be something wrong, I welcome the tears. And recently I bowed. I bowed to her for the first time in my life. And I just bowed to her memory and said, thank you for being my first companion. So when something happens, let's say I'm coaching you right now and you're really upset about something. Could be something your business partner said to you, or you just lost a ton of money. The first thing I might do is like, welcome the feelings. Okay, how's that feel? What's that like for you? Oh, it sucks. And, I'm really worried. Just welcome that and honor that. Okay, then you may not want to stay in that place for 6 months. And so that's where we might do a little bit of the reframing. Okay, how can you turn that around? What's good about this? I just had a client whose ex-husband is not wanting to come to the graduation party for their son. And she's starting to, her mind is just going off like, this is a problem, this is wrong, the family's not going to be together for this important thing. Hey, that's natural. So firstly, how is that for you? How's that feel? Where is it in your body? Let's just really get that. And then, would you like a way out of this? Or you want to stick with that for a while? She says, no, I want to feel better about it. Okay, how is this a good thing? Give me 3 reasons this is a good thing. It's like, well, my son's going to get 2 parties. One with my ex-husband and one with me. I'm like, yeah. All right, how else is it a good thing? Well, we get to communicate more. I could even find out why my ex doesn't want to come to the party. It's an opportunity for boundary setting. Maybe that's not fun for him. So he's just going to create his own party. How awesome is that? And then by the end of the call, she's like, oh, this was a problem. I guess now it's not a problem anymore. That's possible, I believe, with everything, including death, including war, including, I'm always hesitant to say this, but I just think about things that really trigger people: politics, abortion, rape, gender issues, all of these things. I've seen Katie work with people on things you'd think were absolutely wrong and bad. And I've seen them come out the other side with some peace. And so I just don't, I haven't found a limit yet to
No,
this
I'm
concept,
with you.
and I'm still on.
To catch everybody up, David's talking about Byron Katie, who wrote the book Loving What Is and has created something called The Work, which is a way to question your thoughts, question how you feel and think about what's happening around you, and to unhook those and turn those around so that you have a more freer relationship with whatever it is that was troubling you. And I'll put links in the show notes, because Katie puts so much free, all her work is free, and you can access it and you can play with it. Have you been to the school for the work?
I have. I did the 9-day school for the work, which firstly I started with a coach, and I got to feel what it was like to do the work being guided, because I read the book and I couldn't really follow it.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked with a coach, and then I was enrolled. I'm going to the school. Even if I'm in a wheelchair, I'm going to that school. And that did change my life. And then I did 30 days with Katie in something called Turnaround House. And we did the work all day, every day. And Katie would sit with us for a couple of hours, just 10 of us in a circle. So yeah,
That's
I got it
special.
as a habit.
That's pretty special. That's pretty
Yeah.
special. I've been teaching the work, using the work, living, breathing the work, for probably a decade now. But I never spent
Oh,
30 days in a room with Byron Katie learning the work. But yeah, it's definitely a game changer. Inquiry is nothing new. Anybody who's on a spiritual journey, self-inquiry is a thing. But what she did with that to make it accessible for everybody and usable has been really kind of breathtaking.
yeah.
Curious.
And the short version of it, like when I'm coaching my clients, we don't always go and do the structure of the work, but I can often see how they got into the hole. I can see what they're like. I was just coaching someone recently whose mother said something very hurtful to her. Now, is that true? No. Mother said something and then she felt hurt, right? So we break it up. And then I could see how she got herself into the hole. And I said, do you want to get out of the hole? She's like, yeah. And so we got to see how what her mother said could actually be taken as something very positive.
Mm.
And yet she got her own wounding. So she took responsibility for that. And then she started to see all the positive things that she just missed because she was so hurt. So I didn't do the work with her, but I was like, hey, how can you reframe that? What's a better way to look at it? And then we come to peace. And that's really what I want for people. Sure, I want more money for my clients. I want more time off for them. But ultimately, I want them to I find peace and gratitude is a really lovely place to rest.
I was looking at one of your workshops and the outline for one of your workshops, and again, like I do the Snoopy dance inside when I look at your work, because in order to be successful, you don't go the normal route. You start talking about the inner work. How do you get to a better state? How do you deal with, not just how do you deal with conflict, but how do you unhook yourself from a resentment, from those kinds of things? And you talk about difficult conversations. Talk about when you're working with people in organizations, how much of this is inner work and how much of this is skill?
How much is inner work for the
Teaching inner
client?
work or teaching skills?
Wow. It's interesting because I don't sell it that way
I don't
because
either.
yeah,
I'd be broke.
most people don't say, hey, I need a bunch of work. They know that they could use it, but the mind says, want more money, want more time off, want to get rid of these problems that I have, or I want to take advantage of these opportunities. But along the way, maybe it's 50-50. Some of it's the practicals. Like this one client this morning, what do you want 12 months from now? So just practical stuff. And he had to think about it. And I poked a little bit. And he's like, well, okay, I want a health goal. I want a money goal. And I want a time off goal. Okay, great. Let's measure them. What do they look like? We threw it around a bit. Now he's got, all right, I want to swim twice as many laps as I can now in 45 minutes. a year from now, I want to be able to do twice as many laps. Okay, great. And we just start like planning it out. And then I'm like, all right, your homework is we need a plan for each of these. So what food are you going to cut out and what food are you going to add into your diet? What are all the tasks in your business that you currently do? And which of those do you want to farm out? We're not going to do it all overnight, but let's start with so that was all practicals. But in our next session, he might be afraid of a certain action. He might be afraid of a conversation. I'm very courageous and I get afraid of stuff all the time. I'm afraid of doing the walkthrough in my last house because I think the owner's going to spot 1,000 things I didn't even know were damaged. I'm going to lose the whole deposit, right? So we have fear, and then we get to really look at that with one of my clients who said, hey, I got this issue with a client. I was able to help her see the bigger picture and say, where else are you having boundary issues in your life? Oh, okay. The ex-husband, the kids, myself, other people. So we kind of handled the practical, but saw it in the bigger picture. So now she can apply that same skill that she's learning with different people. She can practice maybe 50-50.
Cool. Yeah, one of the revelations when I first became a coach, I was working with a CIO who came in that day with a business problem. It was just he didn't know how to handle this problem, and I'm not a CIO. I didn't know how to fix his problem, and we spent 55 minutes of our hour together working on some inner work, relaxing him, getting him to see all the things that had bound him up about the problem. And just before he was about to leave, he said, oh, we didn't handle the problem. And I said, oh, that's easy. Went up to the whiteboard. I wrote out the problem, and I wrote out the solution. And he says, wait a second, how'd you do that? I said, well, you actually just told me that in the conversation after you were freed up. So for me, it's a big part of it is getting people into a state where they can access their own genius and the answers that they already know.
I love that. I once coached someone who was really freaking out. His situation was personal, that his roommate was going to travel during COVID. This is right at the beginning when people were just getting the stay-at-home order in San Francisco. His roommate was going to violate that and fly to another state to see her parents and then come back and maybe give him the virus. And he was freaking. And I said, look, we'll get to solutions and we'll probably come up with 6 or 7 things and you can order them in order of priority. We'll talk about lawyers, we'll talk about police, we'll talk about begging, we'll talk about a whole bunch of strategies. But firstly, are you willing to go into this feeling a little bit and just see what's got hold of you? And he was. So we got to work with that. And I said, let's at least just start with naming, you are freaking out and you are afraid to die. He's like, yeah. Okay. And so we worked a little bit with the fear of death to see if he could actually relax into, I am going to die and it's okay. We did a little bit of softening around that. And then I said, now that your energetics are better and more comfortable for you, you're going to be more powerful coming from that place. So then we got into solutions. And he was really open and transparent with his roommate, and they came up with a deal. They came up with some kind of arrangement that could work. So I love how you said that. Yeah, we'll work with the energetics and the belief system, whatever. And then, sometimes the solutions to that one particular thing might even be quite trivial in the end.
Sure. And I think it's really relevant for our difficult conversations. So on your website, you have something that is so cool that I'm going to ask your permission to steal. Difficult conversations, tough conversations, those sweaty palm conversations are all through my book, all through my work, something that was really hard for me that I become really good at. And that's what I teach all of my people. You have a thing called spot coaching for difficult conversations, where you can get people to unhook, you can get them to go and have those difficult conversations with a little bit of coaching. And you have a whole workshop on having those tough conversations. where, so you obviously think that it's important. Can you tell me more about, how you delve into that?
Yeah, sure. The way I got into that is I did a course with Landmark Education. They have a course called the Landmark Forum. And I said I'd only do one and then get out because I didn't want to be a self-help junkie. Well, looks like I am a self-help junkie. I'm crazy for it. But every time I did one of their courses, they had me make a list of people that I didn't like or felt incomplete with or resented or felt guilty about or just would not want to pass on the street. And I'm like, I can't think of any. Keep looking. And I'd come up with a list of people and then they'd be like, all right, now call them. I said, no. You kidding? I'm not going to call that kid from high school that bullied me. I'm not going to call that girl who dumped me twice and who I hate now. I'm not going to do that. Well, their argument was that some of that energy could be freed up and I could find my way towards some peace in my own life if I just resolve some of those issues. Now, those were past conflicts. When you get to present conflicts, yeah, I had a big list of that as well. All right, well, I'm a little bit shy about asking this girl out. That's a tough conversation. I don't want to tell my employee that they're not doing very good work. Um, I don't want to tell, there's all sorts of things. And I found that when I have screwed up the courage to go and have those conversations, 9 times out of 10, things get better. Now, 1 in 10 times, okay, we might mess it up or we trigger something. The exact thing that we were afraid of happened. They got offended. Maybe they're crying. Maybe there's some kind of consequence that I didn't want to have happen. Maybe my roommate's going to move out or my girlfriend's going to break up with me. But even when it looks like that's the wrong thing, sometimes it turns out that that was actually the right thing. And sometimes it turns out that we just need a second conversation. We need a round two. Hey, can I do a do-over? I don't think I did that very well. So I'm a big proponent for finding those conversations that are a bit edgy and stepping into the leader inside of you and with kindness and with care, addressing these issues. It is literally, not all the time, but this process literally is life-changing. I just had an example 2 weeks ago. My dog's growling because the guy's still downstairs installing the internet. I just had the owner of my house that I was renting move in below me. I was nervous about that for 2 months because I was worried about setting boundaries and him taking liberties and, because he built the house, he's never rented it out before. The first day he's there, he opens the door that connects his apartment to mine and walks in and starts using the storage room. And I'm just looking at him in stunned disbelief. And I'm starting to panic. I'm like, I can't imagine living in a house where this is going to happen. And I said to him, would you give me a heads up when you need to use that room? He said, no. I'm just telling you how it's going to be. I'm going to be using this room. I won't come upstairs, but I'll just be doing. I was like, wow. So firstly, I jumped into boundary setting and I did a whole bunch of things, including calling the police. I said, hey, can you help me here? I don't know what my rights are, but maybe you can help mediate something. But then ultimately, and they mediated something and he agreed that he'd give me a heads up, but it wasn't enough. And so I decided I need to have a tough conversation. I need to find a way to get him to say yes to the conversation. So I sent a long text, asked him if he would meet me for tea in the garden. And I got a yes. And then when we had tea, I didn't start with, you're an asshole and I need you to obey the lease that we've signed that says that I need a head. I didn't start with that. I just started with connection. I started with, how did you manifest this house? because I want to manifest something like this for myself. How did you do it? And he talked for half an hour about what this house and the land meant to him. And then after that, I said, "Look, can I share with you what's been going on for me recently?" He said, "Yeah." And I told him, "I'm suffering. I'm trying to change my mind so that I can get good with this. And I am miserable. Is there any chance you'd be willing to give me 24 hours notice so my nervous system can just relax?" And he said, "Yeah." And I cried. Sitting there in front of that man, looking out over the mountain, I had tears. And I said, "I can't tell you the difference that makes to me that I can just relax in my own home."
Mm.
So that transformed my relationship to the house. It meant I didn't have to go and get a hotel. And I actually got to welcome the sounds of him downstairs. I offered to carry his groceries. He started offering to pick up things for me in town. He has been a sweetheart. So that's an extreme example of what can happen if you're willing to be vulnerable, willing to have some courage, you can actually transform it.
And what a powerful conversation. Setting a boundary isn't, you're not going to be opening that door. That's not going to be happening. The police understand, like, that's not the powerful conversation that you needed to have. The powerful conversation was connection, vulnerability, and ask, right? And then you were able to have something happen that was more mutually beneficial.
Yeah, well, I think both of these are very interesting threads to explore. The first one is boundary setting. So in that case, when I'm having a panic attack, not knowing how to handle this, there was a lot of boundary setting. So I called the police. Police came and mediated, and it was actually a really good move. I called to see if I can find a friend's place to go and stay for the night. I called his wife, who hadn't moved in downstairs yet, and I said, "I'm having some real trouble. Would you be willing to mediate?" I did a lot of action because I'm a solutions guy, and that worked for that night. It gave me like an initial boundary. But one thing I discovered about myself, and I suspect this might be true of many humans, what I needed was connection. I needed a connection with him so I could feel safe in the house. So by having a cup of tea and really getting to know him and his world, and then with permission sharing my world, I got to trust him. And then, once that happens, everything's going to be so much easier. And I think that's what really transformed it. But I didn't want to step over that boundary conversation because that's a whole exciting field as well. Sometimes you might try the conversation. Let's suppose he was like, "No, he's not going to do it." Well, then explore the other options. Like, one option is I could physically remove him from the premises. Not an ideal option,
No.
but I could, he's older than me. I could probably take him and just say, "You may not pass." And then he can go and, do whatever. But you list the options and the strategies. Here's what we can do. None of those really looked appealing to me. I didn't want to put a lock on the door because that can escalate things. So the conversation and the connection changed my life, literally.
Masterful, vulnerable, and powerful. I think that is a brilliant example. So people want more of you, David. How do they find you?
Thank you. Well, I created a link with a basket of goodies for listeners. One thing you can get at my website is a cheat sheet on how to double your productivity as a checklist. Another thing you can get is access to me if you want to get on a call for 15 minutes and see what coaching might do for your life and where the low-hanging fruit is. You can request that as well. And I send a couple of videos a month if you want to be on the mailing list with what I think is great content from mainly interviews like this one. I take out the highlights and the clips and I send those out as an email. And you can get all of those things plus the care model. We talked about tough conversations. I actually have a cheat sheet for how to walk through a tough conversation.
Invaluable.
I broke it down into very simple steps, CARE, the CARE model. You can get that too. And the link is myfocusgift.com. If you just go to my website and look for this page, you're not going to find it. It's a hidden page just for listeners of interviews like this one, myfocusgift.com. And
we'll put that in the
is
show notes so they don't have to remember that.
Yeah, great. And I created the most memorable link I could think of because I want to give you the gift of focus. And also I have a podcast called Tough Conversations with David Wood, and you can listen in on that as well at myfocusgift.com.
And he actually interviews Byron Katie on that podcast, which is really kind of cool. The subject matters, I went through your podcast, the subject matter, again, just tracks so much well to the people who listen to my podcast, and my work will track so well with your work and really get a lot out of that. David, really thank you for bringing your gentle power into this conversation. Really is an honor to meet you and get to talk to you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm glad to know you.
Thank you. Good luck with your new home.
Thanks.
To everybody else, thank you for taking the time. Your attention and your time is precious to me. I love you. Have a great rest of the day.